So, if you could take a few moments to address,
Sure.
I think it's primarily the judicial reform question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good opportunity to tell people who are protesting to at least so they know what they're protesting about, because I think many of them don't know, and there's a concerted effort to make sure they don't know. Look, the first thing I'd say is repeat what I just said a minute ago. Israel was, is, and will always be a robust democracy, but it's changed its I would say its character subtly and imperceptibly about 3 decades ago. And I'd say this all goes back to a very a very bitter day in Athens about 2,400 years ago.
Okay.
There's this, that's where it starts.
Okay.
I told you history has its roots. Well, there's this brilliant 28-year-old man who sees his beloved teacher forced to drink a cup of hemlock, Socrates. And he says, and it was forced by the Athenian Assembly, the democracy of Athens. And Plato says, and that's a 28-year-old man, he says, what is this crazy system, this democracy? There has to be a better thing. And the better thing, he says, is a utopia where the philosopher is king. You know who the philosopher is? It's Plato. It's Plato. And he says, how will he govern? He'll govern with 300 guardians that he'll appoint, and they'll appoint their successors and so on. Now, this idea sort of ambled its way through the Middle Ages and was soundly rejected in modern times, first by John Locke and then Montesquieu, and then the fathers of the American Revolution. I mean, the curious thing was, Plato said you have to have elevated people, enlightened people to rule and not the masses, right? But then you had these brilliant people, Madison, Hamilton, all these guys, and they said, no, it's not the enlightened people. The people rule. It's we the people, not we the elites. We the people rule. But the way you rule and the way you balance in democracies, majority rule and individual rights, is a balance between the 3 branches of government. Okay? In Israel, that balance 30 years ago began to change. And we have the most activist judicial court on the planet. So it steadily arrogated to itself the powers of the legislature and the executive, where it basically decides. Democracy is supposed to be checks and balances of the 3 branches on each other. In Israel, the judiciary has no checks and no balances. It just has power. And so there's a request to try to bring it back into line, and that has been sort of boiling all the time. I came in, and there was a proposal put in, which I thought was bad, which is to reject one imbalance by creating another imbalance. If the court can rule against any decision made by the government or the parliament, then let's now correct it by having the parliament reject any decision with a simple majority that the court makes. I thought that's a mistake. It's moving the pendulum from one side to the other side. It has to be in a happy middle. I've been looking for that happy middle. I have a majority in the parliament, in the Knesset, to legislate anything, but I didn't. I held back because I want this to be a consensus. And so we made the minimal changes that would bring back a little of the balance that we had in Israel's first 50 years, and that's what we're trying to do now. I'm still reaching for a consensus. If I can't reach it with the other side of the political aisle, which becomes very difficult in today's democracies with the polarizing effect of social media and big money and big data that is used to polarize even further, to arrange demonstrations anywhere on the planet. Then, if I can't do it with the other side of the aisle, then I want to do it with the public. That is to have as broad a consensus for a minor correction, basically some correction on how we choose judges, because otherwise we have, basically 15, in many ways, unelected officials. By the way, I think gifted people, good people, but they replace the government. They're sort of unelected, and they decide everything. That's not exactly democracy. So we're trying to get Israel back to where it was before. I hope we succeed. I can tell you that as soon as I get back to Israel after this week, that's what I'm going to focus my attention on. I hope we succeed. But it's not, I'm described as something between, Attila the Hun and Genghis Khan. Elon, you read a lot of books. I read I read the Federalist papers a couple of times, you know. I'm versed in the theories of democracy and the balance between the three branches of government. That's what I'm trying to achieve, nothing more. And it's not an easy thing to be maligned. I know you've never seen that, right?
No,
You've never
I have no idea what you're
experienced
talking about. Yeah, no, me maligned, never. Yeah, no, I guess, and we don't want to spend obviously too much time on the subject since this is primarily about AI sort of existential risk. But and it's difficult for people here to know exactly how other systems work. But certainly the press in the U.S. has not portrayed the reforms you mentioned in a positive light.
Well, especially the New York Times. I mean, they're on a fantastic obsessive campaign, but they usually get it wrong, so it's not important.
So, I mean, in the U.S., like the courts cannot really produce new laws, but they can
Nullify.
Provided it's against the Constitution.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Well, in Israel, we don't. In Israel, we supposedly have basic laws that constitute a constitution. Now the debate in Israel is whether the court can actually change the basic laws. And it's a big debate. I don't want to get into that and get people into this, but there's always a balance. You know the way you balance the power of the people, the majority, with the court in America is that the politicians choose the judges. Okay, that's something that creates constant tension, obviously, including today. But that's built into democracy. There's tension between the various branches of government. You have to resolve to make sure that you're somewhere in the middle and not in one of the extremes. And that's what I hope I can achieve in Israel. So that's, and I think it'll come out. People will see that Israel was a democracy and will be, in my opinion, a stronger democracy after the dust settles.
Sounds good.
It's easier than AI.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, great. I guess back to AI.